Cheers. So welcome back to the Shaping Bay. Today we're going to do another review video. We're actually going to review a video from a guy who is much more well known on YouTube than I am. His name is Rogue Wave Surfboard Repair or Repairs. I'll leave a link in the description to his channel. Funnily, the first ever video I put out for this channel on YouTube actually used his footage, and he kind of called me out in the comments of my own video. But I like this guy. I do subscribe to his channel, I watch his videos, but he has a technique of filling large voids with QCell, and so this video in particular really captured my attention, and yeah, I was really happy to watch it. And he had a few questions in it, just not for me specifically, but generally, so I thought it would be a good video to go over and watch together, and we can answer a few of the questions. It's down my alley, so let's have a geeze and see what we think.
Up until now, I've been replacing the damaged foam in surfboards with a mixture of QCell and resin. And people have expressed strong opinions on why that is not the best way to fix surfboards. So in this episode, I'm listening to you guys. We're gonna do it your way.
Alright, so off the bat, he puts a screenshot up of people commenting on his previous videos about filling boards with QCell. There seems to be a little confusion of why filling large holes in surfboards with resin and not replacing the foam is a bad thing. And a lot of people think it has to do with weight. If you fill a big hole with resin, it's going to make the board heavier, it's not going to surf as well or the same. That may be true on really big holes, but I'm going to be honest, myself as well, we're not good enough surfers to feel the difference. If, for instance, we busted a fin box in our board and that hole where the fin box was filled with resin, I, for one, am not going to feel the difference in weight. The critical part about filling holes in foam with resin is incredibly hard, foam is incredibly soft, and resin doesn't flex at all, especially in a big pile of it. It's really rigid, whereas foam and surfboards, even the fiberglass skin, flexes. So when you put a hard and uneven material against a soft material like foam, and that foam and the fin, if you're talking about a box, flexes, that ball of resin is slowly chewing away at the foam. Eventually it's going to let go completely, and then the only thing holding it on is the skin of fiberglass over the top. And if you're working on something like FCS plugs, they don't actually have any fiberglass over the top. So then once that fin and the flex of the board has wiggled that ball of resin away from the foam, there's actually nothing holding it in anymore. Your plug's just going to slide right out or rotate. That's a big reason for it. The other big reason is if you've worked with resin before, especially laminating full surfboards, you'll know that you need to get the resin out of your cup or your container as quick as possible, because when you have a pool of resin all tightly compacted like that in a cup or a pot, it's going to get really hot. It'll smoke sometimes. So you want to thin it out on the board. Even if you pour it all out on the board, use it all and then put it back in the container, you're going to have a lot more working time. The resin's not going to get as hot and it's not going to kick as quickly. If you've got a hole where a fin box once was and you fill it with resin, that resin can get so hot that, especially in the case of EPS foam, epoxy boards, you can actually melt the foam. And by the time your resin cures and hardens, you sand it and you glass it or do whatever you're doing, you actually have no idea that you've destroyed all the foam surrounding it because your resin got so hot. So those are the two key reasons why we replace holes in surfboards with foam. We replace the foam, we don't fill holes with resin, even with QCell mixes.
In this episode, I'm listening to you guys. We're gonna do it your way.
So he's using an EPS foam. It's a pretty low quality foam. By the looks of it, it's the lid from an esky or a chili bin or something like that. So pretty poor quality foam, but I'm not going to fault him too badly on that. If that's what he's got laying around, then go for gold, use it. Oh, the crowbar. Oh, brutal. But you've got to be careful when you're removing boxes. I'm not saying he's done this wrong at all, but when you're prying up, say, the back end of the fin box like he was, you're of course pushing the front of the box down to the deck of the board, and it's very likely that he's actually pushed the damage all the way to the deck of the board, to the glass. So you've got to be careful of that.
Now, this is the part that kept me from doing this in previous repairs. I get nervous using a router this close to the side or the rail of a surfboard, and the reason is if your hand moves at all, if you make a mistake, if you look away for a second, that router bit can grab and rip right through the side of the surfboard. Luckily, that didn't happen this time.
I know exactly how he feels about these routers. So I used to have this exact same router. It's either an Azito. I think it's an Azito router or a Ryobi. They're cheap. They've got that going for them. Maybe 80 bucks in New Zealand, something like that. The issue with them is they're terrifying. I remember once removing a longboard's fin box for a customer and almost being in tears because I was so scared of this tool. I knew it was either going to jump and put a big gouge in the customer's board, or it was going to jump and some stupid reflex of mine was going to make me stick it through my arm, or I was going to lose a finger. It was so nerve-wracking. I thought it was me. Once I upgraded to a Makita, and I'm not anyway affiliated to Makita, and I'm sure other brands like DeWalt and some of those higher end ones are the same, but the difference between $250 laminate trimmer and an $80 laminate trimmer, I cannot describe. And of all of the tools I own, as far as making boards and repairing boards goes, the Makita laminate trimmer is the one that really changed my life. I felt so much safer. I felt much more confident working on a customer's board that I wasn't going to tear a big hole through the side of them. I can almost guide that thing with one hand. I still use two, but I probably could. It's so much smoother. It doesn't grab and fling around. So if you are using one of these cheaper laminate trimmers, I can't tell you accurately enough the difference that a higher end laminate trimmer will make. So my advice to him would be save some coin and upgrade your laminate trimmer. So if we have a look here, you can see that he's cut his foam block first. He's then traced the shape, he's removed the box, and now he's routed a hole out in the board to fit his plug. But if we have a look at this shot, the plug didn't need to be that big. So he could have actually routed out a smaller area once the box was out, made his plug smaller. He's removed less foam from the board, and his repair is going to be smaller, which ultimately is good. So he's made the repair a little bigger than it had to be. He could have just shrunk that initial tracing down. I'm pretty sure it's PU, but he's forced to use epoxy because of the EPS. Put the dirty side up, which is good. Keep the clean side of the board, you'll sand the dirty side away, clamp it down. I usually use masking tape, but clamps are probably better.
This is funny. I went for a hike when I was waiting for the board to cure. I just got this new pair of boots by Brunt Workwear. They said they're waterproof, but I tell you what, man, my socks were still wet after this, so Brunt, I don't know what's up with that. Now, they said they're strong, reinforced safety toe, and that did pass the test. Definitely strong, didn't feel a thing on my toe. Real leather, great boots. If you guys are interested in getting yourself a pair, check out the description. Save 10% with the link in there. All right, we'll get back to it.
She's in there. Sand them. Alright, just pausing here on his shaping square. So he's got his foam perfect, he's got it nice and level, all sanded smooth. supposing there's no air bubbles or major blemishes in that foam, that is ready to glass. And one of the big mistakes he's about to make, I have seen this before in case you can't tell, but he's about to install the fin plugs before he glasses. At this stage right now, he should be laminating that foam patch, then he should be hot coating it, then after it's sanded to about 240, then he should be installing his fin plugs. And this is where things start to get a little bit squirrely on this repair.
And then go in the corner here and just...
It should be marking the inside edge there of the fin slots. And he needs to buy an FCS Plug Template. It'll make his life much easier at this stage. He writes, someone please tell me why FCS used to manufacture these with a ridge around the edge. So then you can see here, he holds it up and there is that lip on the fin plug and these two little antennae out the side. So the lip is designed to prevent resin falling in the fin plug while you install it. You can pull it up nice and high around and it's not going to fill your screw hole of your fin plug. He's also sanding away the little teeth that come off the side, and that kind of makes sure that your plugs are at the right level. He now has no way to level these, so they could sink too low. If his routes are too low, they can float up too high, and he's going to have to sand the actual plug away because he sanded that lip away. So you need those little teeth hanging off the side, and you need that lip. Very tedious grinding them down. Yeah, that should be done in the board on your final sand. Setting his depth, that looked shallow, so I imagine his plugs are going to sit high in the board. Routing, he doesn't have a jig, so these are normally done with a drill and an FCS hole saw bit. FCS make, you don't have to use the FCS one, but it does have a benefit to it. But essentially this is just a hole saw. And this is what I use for FCS plugs and leash plugs as well. The leash plugs are slightly shallower, they're not as tall as the fin plugs. So on the side here we have this little screw, and this silver piece around the side actually slides up and down so you can adjust your depth and you're going to get the perfect depth. If we want to go really in depth, because I've never covered this even in my own installation video, this thing is called a scribe tool. So this is from FCS as well. Now the way these plugs are meant to be installed, as far as the FCS guide goes, is you drill your hole into your board. So you drill it down, then you've got the hole, and of course at the bottom of the hole is a piece of foam. You then use this scribe tool to kind of screw your way down all the way to the deck of the board on the other side. What this allows is the resin will then fill the hole, but also it's going to trickle down the little thin groove all the way to the deck, and it'll tie the fin plug to the deck of the board, but the underneath of the fiberglass, if that makes sense. I'll put the FCS diagram up so you can see what I mean. I generally only use this tool if the board originally has, it's called an H pattern. So if it has that H pattern to the deck of the board, then I'll recreate it. If it doesn't, then I won't. And I would generally not put these plugs in a new board, so it hasn't really come up, if I'm honest. But these fin plugs are designed to be installed post-lam or post-lamination. So for instance, these boards behind me, if I was going to glass this board here, I would do all of the fiberglassing. I'd finish the whole thing. Top, bottom, hot coat both sides, sand it, sanding coat both sides, finish the whole thing to about 240. Then I would install these fin plugs, just drill the hole, add your H pattern, install them, sand them flush, sand the whole board, polish it, it's done. There's no glass over the top of these fin plugs.
Look at that.
So you'll see in a minute here his fin
on the money.
is touching the board as he's resining it. So he needs to be careful not to resin the fin to the board itself, which is what those two little antennas coming off the side of the plugs were for. Now he's installed them slightly higher than the foam, so he needs to sand them down to the foam level, but he's gouging the foam, kind of making a mess of the plugs too. Now he has to mask the plugs off, because he has to fiberglass the whole thing. Neat cut. I like his cut. Fin plugs are still slightly too high. He writes, let me know in the comments if you approve of this use of Resin and QCell. So yes, technically this is what Resin and QCell is really good for. You've got little divots that you've created in the foam when you've been sanding it, little imperfections, low spots, maybe a little, like you've pulled a bead out, so that's almost an air bubble. Perfect use. The only thing is, in this case, this should already be glassed and finished, so you shouldn't have damaged the foam, so you shouldn't have needed any Resin and QCell at all other than to glue your foam plug in. So if this were an expanding foam and you were about to laminate it and there were some air bubbles in it, then yeah, this is what I would do first, and then laminate over this really tight coat of QCell. So now he has to laminate over the plugs. This gets so tedious trying to laminate over that tiny little groove. He does this thing I've noticed where he only pours resin a little way to the cloth, then he cuts it, sands it. It's an odd way of doing it. I'm not saying it's wrong, it trips me out whenever I say it. So if we pause here as he's cutting around this fin plug, you can see how much fiberglass is left over those fin plugs. He's sanded most of it away, he's thinned most of it out. By the time he hot coats this, he's going to have a lip on that plug, and by the time he gets rid of that lip, he will have sanded all of his fiberglass off the plug anyway. So there was really no point in doing all of that. It is so difficult and so unnecessary to fiberglass over these fin plugs. I've definitely made this mistake myself trying to do it, and it's near impossible to do. This is a lot of unnecessary scraping with blades and stuff too, because they don't need cloth over them. Little resin dam on the rail to keep the rail sharp, I like that. A lot of repairers miss that. Final sand, you can see that lip from his resin now, so he needs to sand that down flush before painting. Which it looks like maybe he's done. He says, in the last video, a few of you mentioned the possibility of buying small batches of automotive paint. I went to 4 stores and struck out, so I'm still using water-based acrylic paint. He's using water-based paint. Now this is a problem because it's water-based and surfboards are used in the water. So he certainly, I hope he's going to put a clear coat over the top of this, which isn't water-based. I can certainly give him some tips in regard to painting. We might just finish this bit off and then we'll touch base on that. Let's go spray gun. Use that one. Drying between coats, so it's bubbling his paint or anything. Posca. I don't like Poscas, but I think it's because I'm not very good at using them. I always end up with streaks. Nice. Oh. See all that cracking in the paint? It's a sign that there's a lot of paint on there, and possibly the heat gun as well, drying all that paint too quickly. The paint's kind of shrunk and it's cracked. So you want to do really light coats and let them air dry if you can. And that's just clear coat. Automotive paint can definitely be used on surfboards. Yes, it is super strong. So automotive paint, or a two-pot or a two-pack paint, is a paint and a hardener. So you literally, just like resin, you add hardener to the paint. You've got a particular working time with that paint, and then it will go hard, rock solid. It's so strong, it's crazy. Really good paint, very expensive in comparison to other options, but probably a better option than the water-based paint that he's using in this case. Surfboards go in the water, using a water-based product, not ideal. The downsides I see to automotive paint or two-pot paint is, number one, it's really expensive, especially if you're only using tiny quantities like this. It's annoying. You've got to buy the hardener, you've got to buy the paint, you do have to track down an automotive supplier, so it's a little bit of a pain there. And then as well as that, you're going to be spraying it with a spray gun, and because there's a hardener in that paint, you have to clean that spray gun meticulously. Many lifetimes ago, I was an automotive painter, and we had a thinner's sink, so it was literally a sink just like you'd have in your kitchen, but out of the tap, or two taps, one was clean thinners, one was dirty thinners, and we would wash those guns to get every little scrap of paint out of there, because once that paint goes hard, it is rock solid, and you don't want to be ruining your spray guns. So for little paint jobs like this, it's a huge cleanup effort. You've got to buy thinners, you've got to buy hardener, you've got to buy the paint, you've got to have the supplier. It's just not worth it to me. So I always recommend Molotov, spelt Molotov, but it's a German company, but Molotov acrylic paints. They're made for graffiti, although the company would never tell you that. But because of that, they're super weatherproof, they're super UV proof. They're really good. I've done a bunch of tests with them on my own boards. Even without the clear coats, they're really hearty, but they do have a matte clear coat. They do have a gloss clear coat. They're just really good paints. You can buy a color book from them with 275 different colors, so you can match your colors. They're so good, and in comparison to automotive paints, they're cheap. If they don't have the color I need, then I use my little airbrush, or I do have a spray gun as well, but I generally just use the airbrush, and I use acrylic paints in that, airbrush acrylics, for jobs like that. If you really want to use automotive paint, then go to your nearest panel beater or your automotive painter, ask them for their supplier. I'm sure they'll happily give you the details, and they can provide you with paint and amazing color matching tools as well. But from my experience, it's just not worth the time, effort, cost. It isn't worth it. But stop using water-based paint. And here's our before shot. And there's our after shot. It looks good. Looks much better than the other side. Who did that one? I bet that's full of QCell, that other side. No, it's good. It looks great. And that's it. We are at the end of the video. So overall, I don't want to sound harsh on the guy. It was a really good effort. If that's truly the first time that he's used foam in a repair, he did really well. He did every step really well. He just got the order mixed up. So it should have been foam block, maybe a skim with QCell if there were some defects after it was sanded, but then laminate, hot coat, sand it flat, install the plugs, sand them flat, sand, paint, done. You're done. It was a good video because this guy does know what he's doing. He's not an amateur, I wouldn't say. Definitely a step above. So there's some mistakes in there that first timers would make, but there's also some mistakes in there that non-amateurs would make as well. So it was a pretty educational video, I think, all around. And kudos to him for the job. Especially the paint job looked really good. The matching was really good. That greeny blue rail, his white looked really good. The pinstripe came out way better than my Posca pinstripes come out. So he's well on his way, this guy, and I do enjoy his videos. I would highly recommend you subscribe to his channel and I hope he's okay with me making this video. I did ask him in his comments, but he never replied. And I was like, well, I'm going to make it anyway, and better to ask for forgiveness than permission, they say. I'm out of beer, so that must be the end of the video. Cheers for watching, guys. If you're going to subscribe to this fella, you may as well subscribe to me as well. I know the next video was supposed to be glassing a fin onto a surfboard. That job is in the shed next door. It's currently happening. It is being filmed, so that video now will be the next video. We'll see you in the next one. Thanks very much for watching. Appreciate it, guys. Do the like thing, do the subscribe thing, and we'll see you in the next one. Chee-hoo!
God, okay, it's happening. Everybody stay calm.
What's the
Everybody
procedure,
stay
everyone?
calm.
What's the procedure?
Stay calm. Everybody calm down. No, God. No, God, please, no. No. No.